Whether we're on the water or navigating life's curveballs, right? We're always learning something about ourselves. And in the end, to me anyway, seems like every meaningful journey is an inward one.
Welcome to the Passages from the Heart podcast, a podcast featuring real people sharing real stories about adventure out on the water. I'm your host, Shell Hart. Ahoy, and welcome to the Passages from the Heart podcast. I've got another spectacular interview for you today featuring my guest, Susan Marie Conrad, a solo paddler, kayaker, adventurer, speaker, and author. Susan shares how she fell in love with the sport of sea kayaking, despite growing up with parents who forbade her to be anywhere near a body of water. We also cover key kayaking basics. For example, the different kinds of kayaks and what each is designed for, as well as best practices to dive into the world of paddling and kayaking. Our conversation then shifts to Susan's memoir, Inside, One Woman's Journey Through the Inside Passage, which chronicles her 2010 66-day 1,200-mile solo paddle in her 18-foot sea kayak up the coastal waters of Washington State, British Columbia, Canada, and the Alaskan panhandle, a water route collectively known as the Inside Passage. 12 years after her 2010 adventure, at the tender age of 62, Susan repeated the voyage. Stay tuned to learn more about Susan's adventures out on the water and how they've shaped her life. And now, on to the show. Suze, are you there?
I'm here. Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
I want to officially welcome you to the Passages from the Heart podcast. And as I have been saying for some time that we've been communicating, Susan, I'm just absolutely thrilled to have you on the show. I will say you are my first non-sailor, although you are a sailor, I think, because you did do some kayak sailing last fall, as I recall, which we could maybe get into that a little bit. But you are. It's because of you that I decided to, I don't want to just, keep it to just sailing. I want to get into other water sports and especially the kayaking, because I just became a kayaker myself last year. And I would love to have you kick us off with, how did you become a kayaker?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's so good to finally be chatting with you. And before we dive in, I just wanted to say how much I love the name Passages from the Heart. Yeah,
Oh, thank you.
yeah, I mean, it says so much, right? Whether we're on the water or navigating life's curveballs, right? We're always learning something about ourselves. And in the end, to me anyway, it seems like every meaningful journey is an inward one. So I just love the name of your podcast and your blog.
Oh, thank you so much. It was kind of a double entendre, I think. I didn't really mean for that to happen, but yeah, thank you so much. That's very touching. Thank you.
And I guess I'll start by sharing that I grew up in a family where sports were definitely not encouraged. Especially being a girl, my family dynamics were more along the line of you go to school to learn, and that's about it. You're not there to socialize, you're not there to spread your wings, and you're definitely not there to do sports. And ironically, not only did my parents do little to encourage me to follow my dreams and or believe in myself, they tried to instill this deep fear of water in me. My cousin had drowned in a river when she was 3, and I was quite a bit younger than that. But fortunately, it didn't stick with me, this fear of water thing. So in terms of how I got into kayaking, let's fast forward to my college years. I was in my late 20s, and I think it was my freshman year at Southern Oregon University in Ashland, Oregon. And I was walking around campus. And I had spotted some tents pitched on the lawn, and there were some big rubber rafts scattered all around, and then a bunch of these little shiny boats that, of course, were little whitewater kayaks. And I stuck my head inside the door, which was the college's outdoor program, and never been in there before. And I was like, "Hey, what's all this? What are you guys all about?" And pretty quick, I was recruited. They brought me in under a work study program. They immediately saw like my enthusiasm and passion for this, and now I'm recruited as a whitewater raft guide, like within weeks. And I really just knew enough to be dangerous. And I have this distinct memory of being on a river with the outdoor program, and I was captaining one of their rafts. It was a college trip, and there was about I think maybe 10 or 12 people in my raft. So 10 people that I was responsible for. And I kept watching these little whitewater kayakers just play in the river features. And they were so nimble and graceful and doing spins and flips and surfing. And I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to do that. So I did. I got into whitewater kayaking. And then after I graduated from university, I moved to Montana and I got big into it, started running class 4 and even class 5 rapids. But it wasn't until now, this would be like 1991, I think, when I first slithered my hips, as I always say, into a long, skinny sea kayak in landlocked Montana. And I immediately recognized its potential for solitude. And I thought, wow, this is like backpacking on the water. You can, put all your gear in these watertight hatches and just disappear for days and weeks. And for me, what would eventually become months at a time. And so it was a sport that like really resonated with me. And I started guiding for a small company in Montana. And I did that seasonally for almost 10 summers. And then I started my own company that I ran with my then partner. And we ran that for nearly 10 years. And during that time, I got certified as a kayak guide and instructor, ACA, American Canoe Association, as a level 4 kayak guide. And that really upped my skill set. And then I really began to learn how to navigate the dynamics of salt water, right? Because I'm in landlocked Montana, it's just big rivers and lakes. And so I'm learning about tides and currents and seamanship and weather and all of that. And I was like, wow, this is so cool. So with our business, we started bringing paying clients to the San Juan Islands here in Washington State, which is where I live now. And after about 20 years of this sea kayaking experience, I felt that maybe, just maybe, I was ready to paddle the Inside Passage, which is about a 1,200-mile coastal route that starts down in the Seattle area and goes all the way up along the British Columbia coastline and all the way up the Alaska Panhandle. So I did. In 2010, I launched from Anacortes, Washington, here in the San Juan Islands, and I paddled solo 66 days to Juneau, Alaska. And then 12 years later, in 2022, when I was 62, I got a wild hair to do it again. And I did. And that's a whole nother story, which we may touch on in our chat here. So yeah, that's a very long-winded way of explaining how I got into this wildly wonderful sport of sea kayaking.
Well, it's not at all long-winded. I could listen to you for hours. There's so many things that come to mind after hearing your story with that. And I guess as a beginner kayaker myself, one of the things that I learned and would love to hear your thoughts expand upon this. I didn't realize that there were so many different kinds of kayaks. So for example, I don't live near, well, I do live near a river, but rivers scare the pants off of me. And that's another story. But I do live by a lot of lakes, inland lakes, not like the Great Lakes, but no oceans. So I wasn't aware that there were, well, first of all, I wasn't aware of the first kayaks that you were talking about that were so nimble. I think that they're much shorter, right? Like for
Yes,
going down
absolutely.
rivers and rapids and whatnot. And yeah. So I learned that there were, okay, so there's recreational kayaks, which is what I ended up with, which is just I ended up with a 10.5 foot perception. It's actually a fishing kayak, to be honest with you, but I got it because I have a little touch of claustrophobia. And so for me, this design appealed because the cockpit of it was pretty generous. And
Mhm.
so while not ideal in situations where you can get swamped, the boat will sink because there are no bulkheads and there's no flotation in it. So it's one of those things where I really learned I had to be conscientious of, okay, what are the conditions that this vessel is designed for, and how can I stay safe using it as a beginner kayaker? So I would just was curious for people who are interested in getting into kayaking, what sort of questions would you have, and how would you guide them in their maybe you might say, hey, don't even buy a kayak for the first summer. You might say just, you know, maybe take lessons, or find a friend who has one and borrow theirs. I mean, I'm curious, what do you think about all that? What would you tell a person that's totally new to this?
So yeah, that's a great question, and it brings me back to when I ran my own kayak company in Montana, and in addition to guiding and instructing and offering rentals, we also had a full retail presence. We had a sizable storefront, and we sold all kinds of kayaks, from whitewater kayaks, recreational kayaks, like you mentioned, sea kayaks, surf skis, which are racing kayaks, and canoes. And then all the accessories, right? The paddles and the spray skirts and the life jackets and just all the bells and whistles that go with it. And so, yeah, we would always have people come in, total beginners. I would always joke, like people that don't even know how to spell the word kayak, right? And so, like, they want to know what kayak to get, and they're looking around the showroom, and there's hundreds of them, and they're all different sizes and shapes and colors. So the first thing I would ask them is, what do you want to do? Right? What do you want to do with the kayak? And most people, like you, they just want to, you know, like, what's the word I'm looking for here? Just kind of noodle around in protected waters and nooks and crannies and like really mellow rivers.
Yeah,
And then in that case,
gunk.
I would steer them toward more of a recreational model, and then be very um, succinct, like what you shared. And I applaud you for really understanding the limitations of the recreational boats, and how they're great for beginners, but they have limitations. They're not seaworthy because they typically don't have bulkheads, and even if they do, it's a good analogy is to think of like a tricycle, right? Got these three wheels, a big seat. It's super stable on flat ground, but you get that on a little side hill, right? And it's just going to topple right over. So it's the same thing with
Yeah,
these
good
big,
point.
wide recreational kayaks. You get that sucker on a wave, and especially if you don't have the skill set and know which way to lean or edge the hull of the boat, you're going to be upside down in the split second. And since it's such a big cockpit, it's going to take on so much water, and it's going to be really problematic to A, swim it to shore if you're close enough, or B, to affect a re-entry, a deep water re-entry, a self-rescue or a buddy rescue, and pump all the water out. That's a whole nother skill set. So yeah, like, do you want to get into whitewater kayaking? Do you want to just have a recreational boat? And a lot of customers would start with the recreational boats, and then they would come back. They take a beginner lesson from us, and then they would often upgrade to a user-friendly sea kayak. Not like a tippier racing model, but now they've upped their game a little bit. They've practiced in controlled conditions of capsizing on purpose, with a coach right there, and learning how to hold on to the boat and the paddle and anything else that might be floating away, and how to flip the thing and how to get your butt back in, which is easier said than done. And
Yeah, I bet.
yeah, and I just love teaching it, and I would always preach that, okay, you've done this here with me, either in the pool or in this calm bay here on this lake, but don't even think this is going to work in a real quote unquote combat situation where a wave has capsized you, taken you by surprise, is something that you have to practice, over and over and every
Yeah.
day before you go out on the water. And the same thing with the roll, executing a 360, right? Everybody's got the 180 down, but the 360, a lot of people, they come into my store and they want to learn how to roll a kayak, and before they even know how to paddle one, and I'm like, why? What is it, just like a party trick, or you know and they just think it's
Right.
something cool to learn. But again, yeah, I can teach you to roll, but it doesn't mean it's going to work when you need it,
Right.
unless you are so dedicated to practicing it in real conditions, quite
Yeah.
regularly. So yeah, does that answer
Yeah.
your question about the different types, and
Yeah.
who might be drawn to what sort of boat?
Yes, that's extremely helpful. And I know will be very helpful to listeners as well who are also interested in learning about this. I mean, I do recall on the little lake where I do most of my kayaking, there was a couple that had, I recognize them, I think, as sea kayaks, and so they're more so kind of what I take away from the sea kayak and like my recreational kayak. So for example, like you were mentioning about the cockpits on the sea kayaks are more and they're a more narrow beam boat.
Hmm.
And I
Typically, yeah.
also believe that, yeah, typically also longer, probably. Like my boat's only 10 feet. And I think I've heard that the longer the boat, the faster you can track and more accurately you can track. Would you say that's right?
Well, it depends. I mean, there's so many different types of sea kayaks out there, but yeah, they're typically longer and narrower than the recreational boats. They have watertight hatches, bow and stern hatches, and the cockpits are typically smaller. But that tracking ability really depends on the whole design. Like some of these sea kayaks are, say, for example, they're 17 feet long, but they have such a rocker to them. Like think a banana, like the curvature, the bow and the stern are upswept or swept up. And so the waterline length might only be 15 feet. And that's where your speed comes from, is how much of the boat is actually in contact with the water when you're paddling forward or backward. But the advantage to having the upswept bow and stern is how it handles in bigger conditions. So, like for example, when I did my second Inside Passage trip, I was in a much more high performance boat, one that a beginner probably wouldn't feel comfortable in. Um, but it was a full on expedition boat, 17 and a half feet long, but it had that rocker to it. And I got caught in some conditions where I know I would have been upside down had I been in one of my earlier, longer, stiffer tracking kayaks. The previous kayak I had was another great sea kayak, but it was designed to get from A to B to Z. It was a fast boat, but it wasn't that responsive in big conditions. So again, that's why you want to practice your rolls and your rescues, and all of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like your favorite pair of jeans, like no one size fits all for kayaks. And a great way, like here on the West Coast, um, a lot of these kayak companies and retailers offer what they call demo days. And sometimes they'll all get together and have like a big paddle fest in the spring and summer on the shore of some of these big lakes, or even on the coast here. And so all these retailers will bring all these different kayaks for people to try before they buy, sort of thing. And there's no obligation to buy. A lot of people are just, dipping their toe in and see what they like and what they don't like. And I think if you have that resource, that is just phenomenal, to try out different kayaks, and you'll realize, oh, I don't like this at all, or wow, yeah,
Yeah.
this is what I want. And same thing with
Yeah.
life jackets, and all of that. The boat is just part of it. um,
Yeah. Good
yeah.
point. I didn't think about that, but you're right. I actually did I started out with a paddle that the guy that I was that I where I bought my boat actually was just at like a basically a big box. It wasn't Costco. It was a sporting goods store called Shields. So they like sell all kinds of stuff, you know. But at any rate, the guy said, "Well, hold your arms out and oh, this one looks like it should work for you." And I'm like, "Okay." And well, I used it for maybe a month or so, and then I started to feel the sensation that because I started getting the hang of things a little bit with my boat and how it maneuvered, and I started to feel like I wasn't getting a lot of productive pull, or I don't know what the word, if there's a word for it, but as I would stroke each
You're both.
side, I felt like they weren't very productive strokes. Like my effort, the level of effort wasn't yielding much as far as propulsion
That's the word.
distance.
You got it. Bingo. Propulsion.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. And so much of that is, well, the paddle and
yeah,
then also your technique. And I've always said, the forward stroke is minutes to learn, a lifetime to master. And there's just so many nuances to it. But having a good paddle it can make such a difference because it takes like 1,000 strokes to go a mile, right? And so if you're out there for a 5 or 10 mile day and you're with this really clunky paddle that, feels like a 2x4 when you're putting it in the water each time, that's going to really fatigue your arm
yeah.
and your upper body, and it's just not going to be as much fun. So I highly recommend people, once they kind of cut their teeth and decide they really like the sport, to not only upgrade their boat if they can, but the paddle is so important.
One other technical question I was curious, it's kind of a two-part question, is okay, so we're back to that newcomer in the store that you have, which by the way, I wish I could have visited your store. That would have been phenomenal. We
Mhm.
do have one here, but the people don't seem quite very animated about what they're doing. I don't sense a real, I think for them it comes across as a job and not a passion. And so for me, that was kind of like a bit of a lackluster experience when I first initially visited them. And then I just kind of had to go feel like I felt like I had to go out on my own. So
Mhm.
for people that may not have like a store like you had, or like they have an experience that was similar to mine where they didn't have very helpful folks. I mean, should people, would you say, hey, you really should try to connect with a school where you can learn how to, maybe learn how to do these paddle
Mhm.
strokes effectively or properly? And because, like you said, the technique, like I don't know if what I'm doing is really what I should be doing or not. So for
Yeah.
somebody like me, again, like what would you say? Like books, websites, a place to take lessons? I mean, where does someone like me go from that point forward?
Yeah, I mean, but there's so many books and websites and Facebook group pages out there that are phenomenal resources for technique and finding your kindred spirits. But none of that can replace one-on-one or just hands-on learning. So, and I know that's not, not everybody has the wherewithal to do that, but I really encourage people, regardless of where you live, just make the effort to find a professional, certified um, establishment, company that teaches hard skills. And there's tons of them here on the West Coast. Gosh, you got to come out here, Shell. There's talk about people that are passionate about what they do and how they share that passion in such a professional way, just getting people out on the water safely and yeah, just turning them on to this wonderful sport of sea kayaking. So yeah, take professional lessons, learn boat control skills, really solid forward stroke, a backward stroke, turning the boat sideways and around in circles and rolling it and getting back in it after you've dumped and helping your buddy. And then, of course, all the seamanship skills, learning how to read salt water and tides and currents. I mean,
Yeah.
just like I said, minutes to learn, a lifetime to master. And I know the Great Lakes area have several reputable companies, and the East Coast does as well. I can always email you some links, and you can put it in your show notes or on your YouTube channel or whatever works best for you.
Wonderful. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah,
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 would
you
love
bet.
that.
Hmm.
Well, let's transition to the wonderful book that you wrote, Inside. I read it, and as I mentioned in my book review, I did not want it to end. It was just so good. So I think as you mentioned to me in the past too, it started out as sort of an adventure story, but then it became much more than that. And so talk a little bit about the book with the journey, like what went. I mean, you mentioned that it was not such an easy process to write the book, right? And that maybe even doing the voyage itself could, in some on a scale, might have been even easier than writing the book. So I'm curious,
Yeah,
yeah, like how.
I could go on and on about this particular topic. Well, first, as I'd shared with you in the past, I never intended to write a book. I was just going on this little trip, right? And when I came back, I started giving these informal presentations in bars and coffee shops, and my friends were inspired by my stories and images, and they kept saying, when's the book coming out? And I'm like, what? I'm not writing a book, you know. And eventually I did. I did write a book. I started transcribing all of my journal entries, and I thought, well, that's not even very interesting and not remotely even close to being a book. And I kind of went back and forth with it for, let's see, the trip was in 2010, the first trip, and the book was finally published in 2016. So on and off for like 4 or 5 years. And it wasn't until that last year that I got really serious about it. And I had this Maya Angelou quote next to my computer, and I'm paraphrasing it, but I think it said that there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story. And I
Yeah,
guess I refused to be that untold story. And that was my inspiration. So I got serious. I found my voice. I got a publisher. But I always joke that paddling to Alaska was the easy part because, living that experience, but then trying to write about it and make it relatable and write about all the facts and feelings centered around that experience. That was like an endurance event, more daunting than paddling the Inside Passage was. But so when I first wrote it, it was pretty much a finished manuscript, and the publisher had already had it edited in-house, and we had a launch date. I had my presentations all lined up. But when I first set out to writing the memoir, I decided that it was just going to be a book about me, a woman who paddled 1,200 miles to Alaska. It was just an adventure story, and people didn't really know, or I didn't felt that they cared about, all that other stuff, all the messy stuff in my life. But literally, like in the 11th hour, my publisher turned the manuscript over to, farmed it out to an outside editor. And I think her job was really to make sure the formatting was there and all the T's were crossed and the I's were dotted. But this woman was phenomenal, and she specializes in women's adventure literature. And I'll never forget this conversation. She got the book, she read it pretty quickly because it was, pretty clean. It was almost ready to go. And she calls me up and she says, wow, Susan, I loved your book. I loved Inside. And she said, your descriptions were wonderful. I was with you in the kayak, like the whole way. You brought me along for the ride. But, but there's just something, I felt like there was something missing, she said. And
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, and I was like, oh my God. And so she read a couple of examples from the manuscript, and they were always in reference to my family, to my childhood. And I knew right where
Mm.
this was going, and so I shared a little bit with her about my backstory and my difficult childhood, and she's like, wow, that's a lot. You have to make it an all or nothing thing, though. Your readers will lose trust in you if you keep it like it is, because it's just, like there's something missing, like you're not being 100% honest. So she's like, you have to take all these
Mhm.
references out, and it really is just an adventure narrative. Or you're going to go back, you're going to go deep, and you're going to write what happened. And I
Yeah.
did. I went back and I became vulnerable. That book became more than just a woman in a red kayak plying the coastlines of North America. And it became, at that point, it became a multi-dimensional narrative where I shared my backstory of betrayal and abuse and loss and grief. And yeah, I feel that I crafted it to send this powerful message to everyone that whatever your personal challenges, your dreams, your goals, that you are infinitely braver, stronger, and more resilient than you can imagine. And so I put it out there into the world, and I'm so glad that I did, because I think it makes it more relatable to a lot of people. Like, we all experience these universal pain points, right, in our lives.
Yeah.
And whether or not I wanted to relate to everybody, whether they ever intended to set foot in a kayak or not. So yeah, that's how it evolved rather suddenly. I'm going back and rewriting not just the beginning, but also tying that into the rest of the story, and how I grew from all that solitude, and the lessons that I learned along the way about myself, and trusting in others, and on and on and on. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you don't have to be a kayaker to read
mm-mm.
this story. You know what I mean? It's like this is a book for anyone who, I mean, and I look at it, I don't know if you're familiar. I want to say, I mean, this is going back a long way for me in my college days, but I want to say that was Joseph Campbell, maybe, who talked
Hmm.
about the hero's journey. Do you know what have you heard of
Absolutely.
that?
Oh, very familiar.
And I feel, yeah. And I feel like your book is an example of that. Like, I mean, it is because, and it is,
Hmm.
I mean, sure, if you had just left it as a kayaking adventure, I mean, we always look at extreme sports people as heroes of sorts, but what makes your story, I think, all the more special, and in my mind, even more so of a hero or heroine story, is because you do go back and you provide that foundational or that framework to build upon the all of those events and all the pain, like you said, and the successes along the way, because there are some as well, right? That graduate you up to this, bring you up to this place in life where you decide that this is what I'm going to do now.
Yeah.
And it's to me like that's what just makes it such a, I don't know, so all the more powerful. And like, I mean, as you were talking, I just really had goosebumps all over my flesh because I'm just like, I'm just reliving the story now as in my mind and my body, as you were talking. And it's just, yeah, I mean, I think it's really, I'm glad that that woman pointed that out to you, and that you decided to weave that into the narrative, because I do think I mean, I'm sure it would have been a great story without too. It's just like I said, for me, it really resonated with me.
Yeah,
Um,
thank you. And it's I love that you bring up Joseph Campbell's the hero's journey, because I never intended for it to follow that format, but in a way it does, because you have I'm this person in this ordinary world, right, that has this call to adventure. I think this is part of the Campbell's format. And then you go out into the unknown, right? And then you have all these cruxes, all these challenges, all these thresholds that you have to cross. And then there's
right.
lessons learned along the way, and then there's this transformation, and then you bring the elixir back to the tribe, right? So I guess my elixir was
Yeah.
just this deep understanding on my part that we can all accomplish anything we set our minds to. You don't have to paddle 1,200 miles to learn the lessons that I did,
Right.
but we're all infinitely more capable than we ever will give ourselves credit for.
as I was looking through some of the other key points that we were discussing before we went on air, so to speak, you mentioned something about why you decide to do these remote wilderness paddles and do them solo. So, I mean, where does that come from? I mean, I remember in your book you talk about being a little girl and finding I think a little rubber raft somewhere deep in the woods near your property and just going out there and just sitting in it and being in nature and by yourself. I mean, so I mean, does that kind of herald back to that moment in time, or where
Well,
does this desire, passion come from?
yeah, that was a fun little scene to write, and I'm just delighted that scene stayed with you, and it's a scene in the children's book too. That as you might recall, that my kids' book, which is obviously the kid friendly version of the memoir.
Yeah.
There's a scene with me as a little girl in the raft, but I think that just
Yeah.
my sheer independence. First of all, I was uh, totally going against my parents' rule of not being anywhere near the water because they forbid me, right, to go down to this lake. And I had this little raft stuffed in a tree down there. So just my defiance and my sense of adventure and my craving for solitude and being away from all that drama. So I think that's why I immediately took to the sport. But you know, I think the reason I love to go off solo, and of course I do paddle with others, and having run a business and guiding others for so long, um, that's my thing as well. But I really feel that the most valuable lessons are acquired in solitude, and that there's this special clarity that comes with with that solitude. For me, it's such, especially on the Inside Passage, where there is a lot that can go wrong, and over the course of 1,200 miles, I have to be on my toes, right? It's like this heightened awareness that comes from being 100% reliable on my own skills and abilities. I refer to it as my burden of self-reliance. And I love that because I can tend to be pretty, um, you know, ADD, kind of like all over the place and monkey mind, right? And so when I'm out there by myself, I love, and that's the first thing I loved about whitewater kayaking and rafting to an extent. It's like, wow, you got to be in the moment here. You got to be paying
Right.
attention. And I needed that. I so needed that, and I love that. And it's just an intense sense of freedom. And then, another more minor, perhaps underlying reason is I am the classic introvert. I love my own company, and I'm quickly burnt out on big crowds and overstimulation.
Yeah.
So I just thrive. It's not for everybody, but I just thrive on this whole solo aspect. Even, solo, I love to walk by myself out in nature. Just movement and nature is what re-energizes me. And doing it by myself just seems like it brings more clarity.
Well, so this past fall, or was it summer, you did you took you went out to Lake Ontario, right? And it was a little bit of a sort of a different scenario because I don't think you
Way
were
different.
you solo for part of that, or did you have you had a paddling buddy with you, right?
Yes, no, this, yeah, my partner, um, he's Canadian, and he is a wooden boat aficionado, and he's also a boat builder. And he's built a fair number of boats over the years, everything from little rowboats to skiffs, canoes, kayaks, sailboats, and even like full-on motor vessels. Just beautiful. They're like works of art. And so he actually crafted, it's a sailing canoe, but you got to think of it more, it's more of a sailboat than a canoe. It weighs about 300 pounds empty, and it's pretty beamy. I think it's like 36 inches wide, 18 feet long, quite a bit of freeboard. It can holds a lot more gear than our little kayaks. And he's a sailor. And so he talked me into doing a Great Lakes trip. And so he trailered the boat across 5 provinces all the way to Lake Huron. and came up with this plan, which I agreed to. And we were going, and we canoe sailed down Georgian Bay, which is a massive bay on the east shore of Lake Huron, for
Yeah.
60 miles through the 30,000 Islands area, which is the world's largest freshwater archipelago. And then we ducked into what's known as the Trent Severn Canal system. It's a 240-mile system that connects Georgian Bay on Lake Huron with Lake Ontario. And it was originally conceived for trade and military purposes, and now it's pretty much this recreational route. It's got 39 swinging bridges and 44 locks. It's like nothing I've ever done before. And when he enticed me with this, it was like, there's no tides, there's no currents, there's no bears, it's fresh water, you can wash your hair, you can swim. Uh, once we get into the canal system, there's latte stands and pubs, every few miles. And I'm just like, sign me up.
Yeah, that sounds great.
I was like, how hard can it be? So I flew into Toronto and then joined him, and we started our little adventure. And I was on the water with him for 2 weeks, and then I had to fly back. And he continued on and did the remaining. I think he was on the water for another 2 weeks to complete the entire canal system. Yeah, it was an adventure. Obviously not solo. We were in one boat together, and
Yes.
I learned a lot
That
about
would be
sailing.
different, right?
It was very different. It was very frustrating
Yeah.
at first because I didn't even know half of the terminology, and I'm in the front and the sails whapping me in the face, and and I'm learning all about booms and yards and masts and mizens, and there's a lot of boat traffic, and we had a few hiccups, like our navigation system. I was in charge of navigating, and these 30,000 islands, it's named that for a reason. The navigational aids were going by really fast, and I had in addition to the paper charts that we brought in a waterproof case, I was going to use my iPad with the Navionics app on it, which would have made things so much easier. But of course, for some reason, it didn't
Yeah.
work. And so there was just like a lot of,
Yeah.
or a few little hiccups and blips along the way. But we were a good team, and we're actually putting
Yeah.
together a slideshow presentation for our local paddling club here in early April. So we're kind of reliving it as we build this slideshow presentation.
Oh, wow.
It was a hoot. It was a hoot. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I remember you were, posting on your Instagram, and we'll get into, I wanted to give you opportunity to share all of your ways for people to learn more about you too, before we close. But I do remember seeing all sorts of, the ones that really tickled me the most was when you were dressed in the period
Period
attire.
clothing.
Like,
Yes. So the whole
yeah.
thing behind that was so this boat is a very historic design. It's called the Nautilus, and my partner Steve has told me the backstory, the history behind it, but I won't even try to share that because I'll just slaughter it. But I will say it was a very historic design, originally, I think from like 1860, 1861. So we dressed in period clothing from that time in history. So I wore
Ah,
this white frilly dress, and I had a parasol, and Steve had knickers that he made, knickerbockers, and a tweed vest, and the hat and the glasses and the whole bit. And so when we went through these locks,
wow.
we got into our period clothing, and boy, were we the talk of the town. And I think we're on so many people's home videos, right? Because it's mostly these,
Oh,
$250 yachts coming through, not like some little sailing canoe where like, who are these people and why are they dressed that way? And then they would see the boat, which is just drop dead gorgeous, right? Made out of
it
mahogany.
is.
And yeah, and so yeah, so there was a lot of storytelling going on there, and how we kept those outfits white, because when you go through the locks, you're going up and down through these big the canal systems, these chutes, and
With large, huge boats too, right?
yeah, with big boats, and the sides of the locks are quite slimy, and you have to hold on to you have to tether to it very loosely, and so you're being raised and lowered, right, with the canal system, and your boat is and your clothing is usually brushing against the slimy cement on the sides as you go up and down. So we were just
Yeah.
like, how did we keep this stuff as white as we did? It was just hysterical.
Oh my gosh. No, that sounds like I said when I was living vicariously for sure through you guys on that one too. And I think he sounds like such a creative person for sure. And to be designing and building all those kinds of boats, that's pretty I wish I had those sorts of skill sets, especially because I
Yeah.
don't really have a lot of professional help where sailboats at least are concerned in my neck of the woods. But okay, well, you mentioned that you're heading back up to Alaska this coming summer, and that you wouldn't be doing it via paddle. So what's up? What's going on with all that?
Yeah, so what I'm really stoked about is like how my role as a paddler, as a relatively experienced paddler, has evolved into being a mentor for what I refer to as this new wave of younger paddlers that are showing this interest in kayaking the Inside Passage. And doing it in its entirety, like all 1,200 miles from Washington State all the way up to the top of the Southeast Alaska Panhandle. And so I have mentored a handful of these younger paddlers, and particularly women. And quite a few of them have successfully completed their expeditions. And one of them in particular is a young German woman named Maddie. And she flew in from Frankfurt and flew into Seattle. And she came up to my house, which I'm about an hour and a half drive north of Seattle, and stayed with me for a few days. We've been Zooming for almost a year, and getting her up to speed on all things Inside Passage. So she was dedicated. She whipped herself into shape. She's a very skilled paddler, and she started here, the same beach that I launched from. I guess that would have been 15 years earlier. Wow. Yeah, she launched in May of 2025, and I launched in May
Yeah.
of 2010. So the same beach, the same location, the same, for the most part, the same route. There are a lot of different ways that you can paddle the Inside Passage. It's not like a hiking trail where it's just this one path that you take. And she successfully paddled all the way to Skagway. And the boat that she used, she ended up leaving it up there in Alaska because she fell in love with Alaska, of course, and wants to come back. And so, long story short, she is flying from Germany back into Southeast Alaska, will be reunited with her kayak that she left there. And I am going to I have a little set of wheels where I can wheel my kayak onto the Alaska State Ferry in Bellingham, which is a little north of where I now live. And it's a 3.5 day sailing on this ferry to a community known as Petersburg, Alaska. And that's where Maddie is going to meet me. And we are going to take off together for about three to 4 weeks. We're still kind of working out the logistics and the route. And she actually has 2 months. I just have about a month. And yeah, we're going to paddle some familiar waters for both of us, and then also some quote unquote uncharted waters. And then I'll have to head back, and then she's going to continue on and explore a little off the beaten path, not like the typical or the standard north to south Inside Passage route. There's you could explore for an entire lifetime and not even tap into a fraction of what you can explore up there. So yeah, so I'm really excited
Yeah.
about getting back up there and yeah,
That sounds
revisit.
so cool. I'm gonna have to check out when we get offline. I'm gonna check out the map because I'm not familiar with the area that you mentioned. What is the name of that town again? You're gonna meet up in?
Petersburg, and if you just Google Alaska Marine Highway, um, which is the website for the ferry that transports people and vehicles, you can come as a foot passenger. People will come on with motorcycles, bicycles, kayaks. all adventurers from
Wow.
all over the world, and it stops at all these different ports in Alaska and makes the round trip. And on both my expeditions, that the Alaska Ferry was my shuttle ride home. That my trips and most
Yeah.
it's a one-way trip, and then you take the ferry, which typically leaves to go south once a week, so you don't want to miss that boat, and back to whatever
Right.
port, works best for you. So it's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
Well, gosh. Well, hey, let's before we sign off, I would like to, is there anything else you would like to besides like the contact information, which we'll do that too, but is there anything else you'd like listeners to know about you or anything else that's upcoming that you'd like to share?
I think we did a really good job of, covering the main bullet points. One thing that I'll just touch on real briefly, I'm really excited about the book that I'm currently working on about my 2022 expedition. And it's going to be a whole different type of book. It's going to be another adventure memoir, but it's more about retracing um, an amazing woman's route. Audrey Sutherland, she passed away about 10 years ago, but she has always been my inspiration and my hero because she had paddled tens of thousands of miles solo in her 60s, 70s, and into her 80s. So when I read her book for like the fourth time, Paddling North, that was her third and last book before she passed, that tells the story of her earliest kayak expeditions in Southeast Alaska in the early 80s. I just decided the world needs to know more about this woman. And I decided to recreate the route that she detailed in her last book. And so that was the catalyst for me. Once I got to Ketchikan, Alaska, I literally I followed in her paddle strokes. I camped in on a lot of the same beaches, stayed in a lot of the same funky Forest Service cabins, came into
Yeah.
same communities, interviewed people along the way that remembered her. And so this is all going to be woven into this new book. And so much of it is about choosing adventure and figuring out a way to do that as we age, and the courage and the authenticity to figure this out as we age, just to keep moving and do what just do what drives you forward, what your passion is.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I have goosebumps again. And I am familiar with I actually learned of her via your book too. And I did read Paddling North. And it is also a wonderful must read. And I think that's really, I can't wait for this new book of yours to come out. That'll be phenomenal.
Yeah, yeah, it's getting close. I've got about 24, 25 chapters cobbled together, and
Oh, wow.
I think I have 4 or 5 more to go. And yeah, I'm shopping it out to some potential publishers, and yeah, I'm getting really excited. It's starting to finally take shape, and yeah, I think it's gonna be a good one.
Well, okay. So if people, like people like me who are going to be waiting for this to come out, let's talk about how people can find out about when the book is released and what
Mhm.
social media outlets you like to frequent and website info, all those goodies.
Yeah, so the easiest way would be just to go to my website, susanmarieconrad.com. And I think on the bottom of every page, or it should be anyway, and for sure on the contact me page, is a link to all my social media, Facebook, Instagram. I'm not that active on LinkedIn, but I have a LinkedIn account. But then sign up for my newsletter, and that's super easy to do. And I don't inundate people. I'm actually really bad at blogging unless something like really important, like I'm doing a big trip or my book has been released. And if you sign up um, for my mailing on my mailing list, you will be the first to know that this book has found a publisher and what the launch date is, and where I might be, speaking, presenting, sharing my story, and signing copies of the new book.
I mean, people can they buy from you direct or no? I mean,
Oh,
I'm
absolutely.
not
Yep.
sure.
Right on my
Okay.
website, if they go to there's a very obvious books link.
Okay.
There's a link that has all the details about each of my three books. I've got the memoir,
Yep.
the children's book, and then a photo essay book. But then
Yeah, that's
shop,
gorgeous.
and that'll take you to the shopping cart, and you could put a little note in there who to inscribe it to if you want it to anybody in specific.
Oh, that's fabulous.
So
Okay.
yeah, for sure. But then also, local bookstores, of course, it can't be signed by me, but I do encourage people to support their local bookstores. And if they're an indie bookstore, they can order it. Well, they'll know where to get it, but it's Ingram, which is pretty much the distributor that I'd say 98% of book retailers go with. So they can just look my title up in their database and be like, oh yeah, and they'll place an order if a customer comes in and says, I want to buy this, or you should stock this, and you should put it on your shelf next to Audrey Sutherland's Paddling North, which it commonly is found, which just
Yeah.
absolutely blows me away. Yeah.
Well, I'm wondering if one day there's going to be a movie called Inside. No, seriously, I am. Yeah, I mean, I would that would be really cool if
I
that ever
love the way you
happened.
think. I love the way you
Yeah.
think. Yeah.
Well, Susan, thank you so much for spending your time here on the show with me and letting me, ask some questions and pick your brain about kayaking and all the goodies. So thank you so very much.
Well, thanks for having me, Shell, and it's really been my pleasure.
If you are enjoying my podcasts, please consider following and/or subscribing to my show. Your support truly means the world to me, as well as inspires me to keep bringing you stories from others out there with a passion for getting out on the water. Until next time, fair wind.